I'm Ethan Foster, 32, a tech entrepreneur and venture investor. I walked into the Foster Thanksgiving, a man who just sold his second startup for 7 figures. I was ready for acceptance, expecting dignity at least. The table was immaculate, but the air was thick with my father's silent judgment. I saw my seat. Next to my brother's perfect card, mine read, coldly and publicly, the other son. The insult was deliberate, calculated, and utterly public. What do you do when your own family labels you as an outsider at the very moment you achieve peak success? In the Foster household, there was Brandon, the golden child. Ivy League, senior financial manager, the standard for success. My father, Robert Foster, retired executive, never stopped citing. My brother was the fixed star, I was just the comet they tolerated. My mother, Susan Foster, supported him with a quiet, efficient bias. My work, my ambition? Always dismissed as unstable tech hobbies. Despite the millions my hobby earned, the disrespect was constant. But what happened the moment I tried to share my success and was met only with mocking silence? My entire life was spent chasing their approval. Brandon's smallest milestones were milestones for the whole family, mine were often forgotten. Even after successfully launching my first company, I was only asked about Brandon's promotion prospects. I existed perpetually in his shadow, defined not by my own success but by my failure to meet the Ivy League standard. That constant pressure fueled me. I didn't want the money, I wanted the acceptance that money symbolized. I needed them to finally see me, not as the other son, but just as their son. I thought my 7-figure sale would be the ultimate proof. But what did I discover about my family's prejudice that proved their bias transcended mere achievement? I realized I couldn't win their game, so I decided to change the rules. I stopped studying finance, Brandon's path, and dove headfirst into tech entrepreneurship. My cramped apartment became my first office, fueled by cheap coffee and the desperate hope for independence. That choice brought freedom, but how did my family react when I traded their safe path for the uncertain world of innovation? Their reaction was immediate and cruel. Dad called my ambition naive, saying I was throwing away my education. Brandon laughed, building apps is childish. Stick to things that have real asset value, Ethan. I was constantly reminded that my hustle was worthless compared to Brandon's safe, structured career. I worked on my first startup in isolation, the silence from my parents a heavier weight than any venture capital rejection. They praised Brandon for being the responsible one, while I was the unstable risk. It wasn't just criticism, it was deep disappointment veiled as concern. Did their mocking comments break me? Or did they fuel the relentless drive that led to my 7-figure exit? Their doubt became my fuel. While Brandon enjoyed lavish vacations and family holidays, I was hunched over my keyboard, building the second startup. I missed birthdays, Christmases, and almost every Thanksgiving, trading warm sentiment for the relentless grind of coding through the night. The irony was, the harder I worked, the more successful I became, but the further I drifted from the validation I craved. I was operating in total isolation. No emotional checks, no cheerleaders. Just the conviction that my success, built without their support, would be infinitely sweeter. That isolation led to my biggest win yet, but how did my parents, who value status above all, manage to dismiss a 7-figure exit? I scaled my second company, employed dozens, and raised substantial capital. When I shared the news, Dad's response wasn't pride, but skepticism. Good job, but I'm sure Brandon could do that too, if he weren't focused on real assets. My success was framed as accidental, never earned. Mom only asked if the office was respectable enough for Brandon to visit. I constantly heard, Brandon's work is more stable. They couldn't celebrate me without diminishing me first. They treated my venture as a child's art project compared to Brandon's museum piece. The dismissal was the last straw. The day I got the other son place card, I had just secured the 7-figure exit. How did the sheer magnitude of my financial win clash with their public humiliation? Just as I felt completely burned out by the family drama, I met Amelia Vance, a veteran venture capitalist. She didn't see the unstable risk my parents saw, she saw the hustle. She didn't ask about Brandon, she asked about my vision, my code, and my potential to scale. She gave me the tools, not the money, to succeed. For the first time, someone believed in my trajectory. She was the light I needed to navigate the treacherous waters of scaling my second company. Amelia's belief propelled my startup to market domination. But did that external success finally break through my family's iron wall of prejudice? With Amelia's guidance, my startup went from struggling concept to market leader. We earned significant press attention, validation that felt real, not manufactured by family expectations. For the first time, my success spoke for itself, loud enough to be heard outside the Foster bubble. The internal narrative shifted. I wasn't competing with Brandon anymore, I was building something real. I finally felt validated. The self-doubt I carried for 30 years began to lift. I trusted my vision, trusted my ability, and most importantly, I trusted the small circle of people who truly saw me. The company was soaring, and I was finally free of the comparison trap. What was the next monumental step I took, believing that this time, my family couldn't possibly ignore my success? The deal closed 3 months before Thanksgiving. 7 figures wired to my account. It was the ultimate, undeniable proof of my success, a number that dwarfed any bonus Brandon had ever pulled in. I felt a surge of pure triumph, knowing I did it entirely on my own terms. I booked a flight home. Maybe it was naive, maybe it was a final, desperate plea, but I hoped that this colossal financial achievement would finally force them to treat me, the other son, as an equal. I dressed meticulously, practicing my announcement. I envisioned my father's face, finally admitting he was wrong. I walked through the door, ready for the congratulations, ready for the nod of respect from my father. I missed the small, subtle clue that was waiting for me at the dinner table. What I saw next wasn't just an insult, it was proof that my parents' prejudice was deeper than any financial success could ever reach. What was my single, heart-stopping reaction to the other son place card? I stared at the card. The other son. It felt like a punch to the gut, not from a joke, but from calculated malice. I froze, the 7-figure number in my bank account suddenly meaning nothing. I had achieved everything, and they still chose to label me as irrelevant. Brandon snickered. My mother, Susan, fluttered her hand, saying, "Oh, Ethan, it's just a funny little joke. Lighten up." Dad, Robert, just stared straight ahead, a slight, approving smile playing on his lips. Their light mockery was the final confirmation of their toxic bias. The polite room waited for me to sit down and be the good, quiet, dismissed son I always was. In that frozen moment, the decades of chasing approval collapsed. I realized they wouldn't stop. It wasn't about achievement, it was about control. They needed me to stay small so Brandon could look big. I finally saw the truth, crystal clear. The choice was no longer about accepting the insult, it was about standing up for my worth. What was the powerful, single sentence I delivered before I walked out and ended a lifetime of seeking their validation? I picked up the small, hateful card. It was so light, yet it carried the weight of 30 years of striving for acceptance. I placed it gently next to my untouched plate. In that second, I wasn't the wounded son anymore, I was the CEO, executing a definitive break from a hostile environment. I stood up. The room went silent, all eyes fixed on me. I looked directly at my father, then at Brandon, and delivered the single sentence that ended my performance. "I am done trying to earn what was never offered," my mother gasped. Brandon began to protest, but I didn't wait. I turned my back on the exquisite, expensive meal. The moment I started walking toward the front door, the silence shattered. Replaced by my father's confused, angry demand to sit down. He shouted my name, but the name Ethan sounded hollow, belonging to a person who no longer existed. I didn't look back. I got into my car, drove away, and returned to my new penthouse apartment, the one I paid for myself, the one they knew nothing about. Holding the key, I realized that true freedom wasn't financial, it was the freedom to choose who gets to be in your life. My exit was dramatic, but the real revenge came later. How did my sudden, massive success hit the media the very same night, giving my father a shocking wake-up call? The silence in my penthouse was deafening, a stark contrast to the shouting I'd just left behind. I poured a glass of single malt, not to celebrate, but to steady my hands. The pain of the other son card was still raw, but here, in my own space, I was finally the primary focus. I opened my laptop, intending to check on my team. Instead, an email from my PR firm flashed, "Forbes is live." I clicked it. There I was, on the front page of the tech section, a deep dive into my 7-figure exit and a bold portrait of me, the founder. The article detailed my journey, my vision, and my financial success, everything my parents dismissed as childish. The timing was cosmic. At the exact moment my family was publicly defining me as insignificant. The world of finance and technology was recognizing my definitive value. This wasn't revenge I planned, but it was the most perfect, cold dose of reality they could receive. The Forbes article was my public vindication. But did this massive public success finally break through my father's pride, prompting a desperate, handwritten message of regret? Moments after seeing the Forbes article, my phone rang. It was Amelia. Her first words weren't about the valuation, but about the place card. She had a network that moved fast. Her voice was calm, a balm to the chaos. "Ethan," she said softly, "I know what it's like to crave a validation that never comes. You just made headlines, and your parents made a massive mistake. But let me tell you this, family isn't always blood. Sometimes, it's the people who actually see you, who cheer for the real you, not the version they want you to be." I finally let the tears fall, not of pain, but of release. Amelia's words, backed by her genuine respect, held more weight than my father's entire legacy. That night, I stopped seeking a seat at their table. I had found my own table, filled with people who valued my worth. The public win was mine, but the internal healing was Amelia's gift. What unexpected and devastating confession did my father send me days later that proved he knew exactly how much he had failed? I stood by the glass wall of my penthouse, looking out over the city lights. I was a success story, celebrated on Forbes, financially invincible. Yet, the air tasted cold. I had won the argument, but the victory felt hollow when the people you fought for validation from weren't there to share the champagne. The money was a fortress, but a lonely one. I imagined calling my parents, hearing genuine pride in my father's voice, seeing a real smile from my mother. But that vision was a ghost. They never tried. They never even asked about the valuation, they just mocked the card. The silence from their end was the loudest indictment. This wasn't just a failure of acknowledgement, it was a fundamental failure of love. I finally understood. My achievements were not meant to win them over, but to provide the resources to permanently remove myself from their judgment. I was free, but alone. The public win forced my family into the corner, but it took a handwritten letter from my father to reveal the shocking truth. He knew exactly what he was doing all along. What was the devastating line he used to admit his failure? 3 days later, a thick, handwritten envelope arrived, sealed with my father's initials. Not an email, not a text, a formal, physical letter. The weight in my hand felt ominous. After days of silence, this break demanded attention. I knew it wasn't a standard apology. I tore it open. The handwriting was shaky. Dad didn't start with an excuse for the place card. He started with the Forbes article. He wrote that his colleagues and former associates had been calling all weekend, asking why he hadn't mentioned my 7-figure success. He admitted Brandon's promotion wasn't quite what he'd bragged about. Then came the truth I had suspected for years: you succeeded on your own terms. And that was a threat to the narrative I built for Brandon. The letter confirmed the place card was deliberate. They weren't ignoring my success, they were actively trying to suppress it. The humiliation was a calculated effort to force me back into the role of the second son, preserving their rigid, comfortable hierarchy. Dad wrote about the disgrace of having to admit he didn't know the details of his own son's multi-million-dollar exit. The shame wasn't internal regret, it was public embarrassment. The shame only existed because the outside world now saw my value and questioned his judgment. The last paragraph contained the only true apology, etched with the desperation of a man who realized he'd lost his most valuable asset: "You were right. I didn't see you. And I don't know how to fix what I broke. I'm truly sorry, son." I closed the letter, the paper trembling in my hand. That simple, devastating line, "I didn't see you," confirmed everything. They always had the capacity to see, but they chose not to. They chose their narrative over their child. The apology wasn't about seeking reconciliation, it was about managing the fallout of a public relations disaster he couldn't control. My act of walking out, combined with the Forbes article, was the only thing that forced him to acknowledge my existence. I didn't need him to fix it. There was nothing to fix. I simply realized that they always knew what they were doing. And my life of effort was a desperate audition for a role that was already cast. The audition was over. The truth was revealed, but the final, most satisfying act was mine. What was my one decisive move that solidified my freedom and proved I no longer needed their forgiveness? The letter gave me closure, not reconciliation. Reading my father's confession broke the final chain that bound me to their judgment. It was a strange, powerful relief. I was finally mourning the family I wished I had, not the one I was forced to live with. The money didn't buy happiness, but it bought the silence I needed to heal. I forgave myself for trying so hard for so long. The fault was never mine. I was free. With the emotional chain broken, I knew I had to make my freedom permanent and visible. What was the single, ruthless action I took to ensure my family could never again use their status to control me? I found peace in my isolation, focused on my next venture. The foster drama was a closed chapter. I felt grounded, financially secure, and emotionally stable, something Brandon and my parents, clinging to their toxic pride, could never truly achieve. Then the phone rang. It was an urgent call from my father's corporate lawyer, Mr. Thompson. The tone was sharp, panicked, and entirely unlike his usual reserved manner. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Thompson delivered the shocker. The family's primary real estate holdings, which backed much of my father's passive income and Brandon's investments, were facing imminent foreclosure due to a gross financial mismanagement error traceable to Brandon. The lawyer explained the situation was critical. Brandon hadn't just lost money, he'd exposed the entire family estate to severe liability. If the properties were seized, Robert Foster's reputation would be ruined, and Brandon might face legal trouble. The firm had tried everything, the only solution was massive liquid capital. Thompson's true purpose became clear: Ethan, your father, and brother need a massive, immediate capital injection to cover the gap. We are talking millions. You are the only one with the liquid assets to stop this disaster before the deadline. The irony was suffocating. The family who labeled me the other son because my success was deemed unstable now depended entirely on that unstable wealth to save them from the collapse caused by their stable golden child. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence hang heavy, savoring the profound shift in power. Thompson was begging the other son for salvation. I had the means, but did I have the heart? They needed me to save their entire legacy. But what was the one condition I demanded from my father that would serve as the final, absolute act of my revenge? Thompson set up a three-way call. My father, Robert Foster, sounded broken, the ultimate sign of his collapse. He didn't try to apologize for the past, he just outlined the catastrophe. I listened patiently, not offering judgment or sympathy, just cold, hard silence. I can wire the funds, I finally said, my voice steady. But I have one non-negotiable condition. Dad was frantic. Anything, Ethan, anything. I told him, you will publicly and formally Transfer all remaining equity in the family company to Brandon, and then you will retire, stating that the other son saved the family legacy. Thompson choked. Robert Foster hesitated, pride versus ruin. After a long, agonizing pause, he whispered, "I accept." That wasn't just a financial transaction, it was the final, total surrender of their toxic narrative. The papers were signed, the money was wired, and the revenge was complete. How did I manage to save their fortune while permanently solidifying my own freedom from their control? The money transfer was instant. The next day, the public announcement hit the business wires. Robert Foster retires, cites younger son's financial acumen for saving family legacy. The irony was beautiful. My father had to publicly credit the unstable son for saving the legacy built by the stable one. Brandon received the worthless company equity, a hollow title, and the impossible pressure of keeping the debt-ridden, sinking ship afloat. He became the new captain of the burden, while I kept the seven-figure lifeboat. My revenge wasn't financial ruin, it was giving them exactly what they valued most, and watching it crumble. I never contacted them again. My freedom was absolute. I realized the greatest revenge isn't tearing down your enemies, but building a life so rich, so fulfilling, that their existence no longer occupies a single thought in your mind. I was finally, truly, just Ethan. My story is a cautionary tale about validation. Have you ever considered what the true price of acceptance is, and when is the right time to walk away and build your own legacy? I blocked their numbers and emails immediately after the transaction. My phone was silent, and the digital distance was a sanctuary. Yet, they found ways. They started sending messages through LinkedIn, through Amelia, and even to my former startup employees, trying to bypass the walls I'd built. My mother, Susan, used guilt. She emailed Amelia, detailing her heartbreak and how my actions were killing my father, despite the fact that I'd saved their fortune. She wrote, "Ethan is punishing us for a childish Thanksgiving joke." My father sent a curt, impersonal email to my business account. He didn't thank me. He stated that my overly dramatic reaction to the place card had forced his early retirement and disgraced the family name. Despite the Forbes article, Brandon's messages were the most pathetic. He was drowning in the company's debt structure, unable to manage the pressure Dad had thrust upon him. He didn't ask for money, but for my advice, pleading, "You know the tech better. You need to come back and mentor me." Their attempts at contact weren't about reconciliation, they were about regaining control. They needed me back in the system either as their savior or their punching bag. They couldn't accept that I had broken the cycle. I never replied. The final act of control was to withhold my attention, the one thing they secretly craved most. The only power they had left was the power to irritate me. And I refused to give them even that small victory. Amelia said, "Their hate is just the flip side of their pride. They can't admit they were wrong without admitting they lost control. And they can't live without control." Her words were the final confirmation that my decision to walk away was the only correct one. I looked at the city lights, no longer seeing them as validation for others, but as symbols of the limitless possibilities I created for myself. I was building my own legacy, free from the shadow of their name. They sent one final, pleading email months later. I simply marked it unread. My revenge wasn't loud, it was the ultimate, deafening silence. The silence I gave them was the ultimate weapon. What boundaries have you drawn in your own life to protect your peace, and are you willing to mark that last toxic email unread? I didn't spend the next Thanksgiving alone. Amelia hosted a gathering of founders and friends, people who saw the grind, not the name. The air was light, filled with genuine respect, not performance anxiety. It was the first time I felt truly relaxed at a holiday table. Amelia raised her glass. "To Ethan," she said, her voice warm. A man who understood that his biggest investment wasn't his company, but his self-worth. He chose truth over toxicity, and freedom over obligation. Her words were the toast my family could never have offered. I didn't need to speak about the seven-figure exit or the family drama. Here, success was assumed, and vulnerability was safe. I realized the love I craved wasn't validation for my achievements. It was simply acceptance for who I was, flaws and all. I thought briefly of my mother, probably staging a perfect photo op for social media, missing the genuine human connection right in front of them. The contrast was stunning. They had a legacy of stone, I had built a home of warmth. I found my chosen family, a circle of genuine support. But how does this new perspective change the way I view my entire life's journey? And what is the final lesson I want to share with you? My new office isn't about status, it's about purpose. No polished mahogany, no portraits of past patriarchs. Just glass, steel, and a whiteboard covered with new, exciting ideas. Every day, I build something, not to prove anything to my parents, but to fulfill my own potential. I learned that external validation is a temporary fix for a permanent problem. My parents' approval was a mirror that only showed their distorted reflection. True self-worth must be built internally, on a foundation of integrity and self-respect, not on someone else's conditional love. The act of saving their fortune and forcing the public acknowledgement was a powerful moment, yes. But the real revenge wasn't the millions I kept, or the humiliation they faced. It was the simple fact that I moved on, and they didn't. Boundaries are not about punishment, they are about protection. Saying no to their toxic cycle was the most profound act of self-care I had ever committed. It's okay to sever ties with people, even family, when those ties only serve to bind you to pain. My name, Ethan, no longer carries the weight of the other son. It carries the weight of my own decisions, my own successes, and my own failures. I control the narrative now. That is the true inheritance I earned. The money is simply a resource, a tool to build good things with the right people. It's the safety net that allows me to pursue innovation without the fear of failure. Because failure no longer means seeking help from my abusers. If you're listening, and you're struggling for a seat at a table that doesn't want you, remember this: you have the power to build a better table. You have the power to choose your family, your worth, and your peace. Don't waste your life chasing a ghost. My second company soared, my third is launching soon, backed by Amelia and my new, genuine support system. I finally found my purpose, and ironically, I owe the start of that purpose to a passive-aggressive, hateful place card. Walk away. Don't look back. The real legacy is the one you build, not the one you inherit. The story is done, the revenge is complete, and the peace is real. What toxic cycle are you ready to break today to start building your own ultimate legacy? Let me know in the comments below. I maintained my no-contact rule, but sometimes, information leaks through. I ran into a former business associate of my father's at a conference. He cornered me, eager to talk about my success, but couldn't resist dropping an update on the Fosters. He told me Dad had become a recluse. Retirement wasn't the dignified leisure he'd planned, it was an exile enforced by his own humiliation. He couldn't face the judgment of his peers who knew the other son had saved him. His world shrank to the walls of the mansion. As for Brandon, he was struggling severely. The business, devoid of Robert's connections and burdened by debt, was failing. He was drowning in the very status and title he always craved. The golden child was finally wearing the crown, but it was forged from iron and debt. My mother, the social architect of the family, faced the worst collapse. Her entire identity was tied to her husband's prestige. Once he retired in disgrace, her society ties frayed. She had no genuine friends, only connections to status, and the status was gone. Hearing this, I felt no vindication. No surge of victory. Just a quiet, profound pity. I didn't hate them anymore, hate is too much work. I just recognized them as tragically flawed people who had destroyed their own chances at genuine happiness. The associate asked if I would ever reach out. I smiled, a genuine smile, and said, they made their choice. I made mine. There is nothing left to discuss. That was the real end of the story, not a bang, but an acceptance of silence. I left the conference, realizing the physical and emotional distance between me and the old life was now infinite. They were ghosts haunting a mansion of debt and broken pride. I was free, walking toward the sunset of my own making. They taught me the hard way that a legacy built on pretense and conditional love is fragile. It will always crumble when met with genuine success and self-respect. My legacy won't be in real estate, it will be in the people I lift up. This is the end of the story of the other son. This is the beginning of the story of Ethan. Thank you for listening. The story is done, but the lesson lasts forever. If you had the power, what is the single, most important boundary you would enforce today to protect your peace? Share your thoughts below. I bought a boat. Not a yacht for showing off, but a small cruiser for exploration. Standing here, with the vast ocean ahead, I understood true freedom. It wasn't about the money, it was about having the choice to sail away from the emotional harbor of my past and choose my own destination. The noise of their expectations, the constant need for achievement, the comparison with Brandon, it had all gone silent. My mind was quiet for the first time in 30 years. I no longer spent mental energy planning revenge or seeking approval. The past was simply the wake behind the boat. I still work fiercely, but my mission changed. I now focus my wealth and expertise on mentoring young founders who, like me, didn't fit the mold. I am giving them the support and validation I never received, creating a positive ripple effect. I keep the old phone line active, muted, for 2 reasons. 1. To handle the occasional legal query from Thompson, which confirms my ongoing control. 2. To see the occasional, increasingly desperate email from my mother. I never open them. My goal is no longer to make them feel pain, but to simply ensure they are irrelevant to my joy. The anger has been replaced by perspective. I see my family for what they are, characters in my backstory, not players in my future. I remember the place card, the other son. It used to define me. Now, it serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest rejection is the catalyst for your truest self-discovery. The card made me walk away, and walking away made me everything. The ocean is wide, and the possibilities are endless. There are no limits here, no prescribed roles, no golden children or other sons. There is just the horizon, and the path I choose to sail. The greatest gift I received from this whole ordeal wasn't the money, it was the clarity that my worth is inherent, not granted. Never beg for a seat when you can buy a ship. My name is Ethan Foster. And this is how I started my new life. The story ends, but the journey continues. What chapter of your own life are you ready to close today so you can finally begin sailing towards your own horizon? Tell me your story in the comments. You've heard my story, the revenge, the millions, the final, deafening silence. But this isn't just about me. It's about you and the chains you might be fighting. The struggle for external validation is universal, but the solution, the path to freedom, is personal. The first lesson, your worth is inherent, not granted. Don't let a place card, a job title, or a toxic relative define your value. Your value exists because you do. This mindset is the anchor that holds you steady when the storm hits. Secondly, remember, the real legacy is the one you build, not the one you inherit. My father's legacy was fragile because it was based on pretense. Yours will be strong if it's built on integrity and the people you empower. Third, boundaries are protection, not punishment. My choice to go no contact wasn't about hurting them, it was about saving myself. It's an act of radical self-care. It's okay to sever ties with toxicity, no matter how shiny the chain appears. Fourth, the greatest revenge is moving on. They were trapped, I was free. Fifth, never beg for a seat when you can buy a ship. Stop seeking conditional love and start investing in your own path, your own resources, and your chosen family. What lesson from my story resonated with you the most, and what is the first step you will take towards building your own ship? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of ultimate freedom.